I think there probably are some sky blue things, some birds maybe, or something like that. They would serve as an example as well. So here we have a substance and an attribute, the color sky blue and the scarf. I first note that the attribute is a universal. It's had by the scarf, but it's had by lots of other things as well. And all the properties and relations that I speak of are universals, with the possible exception of Hexaides, individual essences, and certain other properties that in some sense involve particular concrete things. But perhaps at this point, I don't need to explain that notion with any care. But at any rate, even if there are such things, they aren't the same things as those that philosophers who believe in them have variously denominated as tropes or individual accidents or particularized properties. And it is these items, whatever they may be called, that I mean to distance myself from. In my view, although I concede the phrase, the blueness of Jill's scarf might denote something, its referent might very well be identical with the referent of the phrase, the blueness of Julia's scarf. If those two scarves were of exactly the same shade of blue, then the two phrases might very well have the same referent. The idea that a garment might have a color that was essentially peculiar to it, because the color was in some recondite sense a constituent of the garment, is opaque to me. No one would say, or would they? Well, I hope not, but I've been caught out in matters like this more than once, that Jill's scarf had a width or a length or a texture that was all its own and could not possibly be the width or the length or the texture of some other object. Why then suppose that an object can have an incommunicable color, an incommunicable blueness or greenness? All right, so I'm rejecting the tropes. I'm also rejecting the idea that universals are in any sense, however recondite, constituents of concrete things. This would seem to be equivalent to saying that properties do not inhere in the things that have them. In my view, the relation that relates the scarf and the color sky blue, call it instantiation, exemplifying, having, or what you will, is as abstract and bloodless as the relation, call it counting or numbering, that relates Jill's scarf and Julia's scarf on the one hand and the number 2 on the other. The properties and attributes are, so to speak, up there in the Platonic heaven with the mathematical objects, and the substances, the concrete things, are not. Thus, the property being sky blue is no more a constituent of a sky blue scarf than the number 2 is a constituent of a pair of scarves. These properties, these inhabitants of the ontological empyrean, are as abstract and Platonic as anyone could imagine. They cannot be seen, for example, not even if, like the property of being sky blue, they are properties that imply the property of being visible. If properties could be seen, then an abstract thing could enter into a causal relation, for seeing is certainly a causal relation. Consider, for example, the color sky blue. Now, the color sky blue, I suppose, is the same object as the property of being sky blue. At any rate, I can't see what else it could be. You can't see it. You can see things that have it, scarves, for example. You can see that they have it, but you can't see it. Compare. You can see pairs of things and see that they are pairs, but you can't see the number 2. The interlocutor speaks. But what about the experience you have when you look at a cloudless sky on a fine summer's day? Then you see that color, sky blue, but since there's no firmament, nothing that has it. It might be that there were no sky blue objects at all, no scarves or parrots. Still, look at the sky and you'll see sky blue. You'll see that color. I must meet the interlocutor's speech with a flat denial. I say that when you look at an empty patch of sky on a fine day, you see nothing. Well, note that see nothing is ambiguous. In one sense, it means have no visual experiences. When I say that you see nothing when you look at the sky on a fine day, I don't, of course, mean that you have no visual experiences. I mean, rather, that nothing, no thing, stands in the relation is seen by to you. If there were no sky blue scarves, parrots, and so on, nothing would be sky blue. For what would be sky blue? Not the sky, for there is no sky. Not a reflection of the sky in a pond, for there are no reflections. Not some quaily, for there are no qualia. There would, in that case, be nothing there but you looking upwards, and as Chisholm liked to say, sensing sky bluely a sensory state with no object. The color sky blue, I would say, is an abstract thing, and is, as abstract things tend to be, necessarily existent. Since there are obviously possible worlds in which there is nothing sky blue, it follows that this color can exist even if nothing has it, which I suppose is not surprising if the having relation is as abstract and external as the numbering relation. Universals are thus universalia ante res, not in rebus. Properties, moreover, are not located where their instances are, and are thus not multiply located, as some people like to say. And they are not wholly present where their instances are. Rather, they have no kind of presence or location at all. One might as well say that numbers are present when things are present in the appropriate number. That whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together, the number 2, and it may be the number 3, are with them. Properties abound. There are not only such properties as are presented to our senses by immediately present objects, and there's a nice footnote here that you might want to look about why being presented in this sense is not a causal relation. Properties, they're not just properties like roundness and redness and shininess, but there are all such properties as being either shiny and not round, or round and not white, and being the second marine biologist to be married to a president of the United States in the 23rd century. I almost want to say this, that to every open sentence with a precise meaning there corresponds a property, the property expressed by that sentence. Well, Russell showed that that can't be right, but I like to go as far in that direction as possible, and there's a gesture. Of course, I do not mean to imply that there are only such properties as can be expressed in some language. Most sets of real numbers can't be singled out in any language, and for every set of real numbers, there is the property of belonging to that set. To return to concrete objects, if what I say is correct, then concrete things are what David Armstrong has called blobs. They're without ontological structure. Their only constituents are their parts in the strict and mereological sense. Since the only concrete objects are substances, the only proper constituents, in any sense of constituent, of any concrete thing are smaller substances. Okay, now my odd ideas about the mental and the physical. They tend to be consequences of my extreme ontological ideas. And there will be a sort of illustration of how these very abstract metaphysical ideas can have consequences for the philosophy of mind. Let's say that a mental property is a property that entails either thought or sensation, a property such that necessarily whatever has it is either thinking or inclusive sensing. For example, thinking about Vienna, understanding Brouwer's proof of his fixed point theorem, being in pain, and sensing sky bluely are mental properties. Philosophers, and particularly philosophers of mind, like to talk about mental states. What could these mental states be, according to those who accept my extreme ontological ideas? Well, what but certain mental properties? What could my mental state at T be, if not the conjunction of all the mental properties I have at T? What could mental states be, if not properties? They're certainly not substances, are they? Substances like the persons or beasts whose mental states they are. But that can't be right, says the interlocutor, because if that were right, then mental states would exist necessarily. They'd exist no matter what. They'd exist in all possible worlds. They'd exist in possible worlds in which nothing is sapient and nothing is sentient. And they'd exist at all times. Consider the mental state of some English soldier at some moment during the Battle of Culloden, a complex mixture of fear, excitement, calculation, and all manner of desires and beliefs. A desire to avoid being killed, for example, in a belief that he had been born early in the 18th century. If mental states are, as you suppose, universalia ante res, that momentary mental state exists now just as surely as it existed in 1745, and it already existed when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I have no reply to this other than to say that I don't know what a state, mental or physical, could possibly be if it were not an attribute. And I don't see how an attribute can possibly avoid being a necessarily existent thing. Now here's an argument for the existence of attributes being necessary. You might find it an amusing exercise to go through it and find the hidden assumption of serious actualism. in the argument.